Now that you've read William Stahl and have created your working thesis about your stance on whether or not boys should have dolls, it's time to look more deeply into the essay structures that we looked at whenever we first began the Institute. If you remember, we watched Brad and Bama um, give us some structures about how essays are created and put together. Here's mine of what we made during that day, and we've got the different structures are in there. If you remember, when we got to the section on argument, and I've got mine here on the back, we talked about the four major structures that we use to establish argumentative writing. We begin with the hook and thesis in the introduction, as most things begin, and then we talked about some things that you may or may not have had experience with. Two reasons, Nestorian, straw man, and one reason, concession as the last one that was on there. So I wanted to show you a way that you can really make this into a manipulative activity that students can begin to see visually what the structures of the arguments are and how we put them together. So I have my working thesis ready about whether or not William should have it all. I have one stance that I can take of that William should not be allowed to play with that doll. I also have an opposite stance that I can take that William should be able to play with that doll. Then I need to begin my pre-writing, regardless of which stance I'm going to take, to see if I can make a decision about what each side might or could say based on those ideas. So I just did a little bit of brainstorming to think about what was possible. And in my poster over here on the pro side that he should be able to play with a doll, I have this first reason here that action figures are just dolls for boys. That's one reason. Another reason that I can think of is that playing with dolls does not indicate your sexual preference. The third one that I can think about is that, and the one we read in William Stahl when the mother spoke and said that learning to care for a doll is the first step in learning to care for a child. So these could be the major reasons that I could explore for why that might be a good reason for William to have a doll. Now, even though I believe that William should have a doll and that those are the things, I made sure my son had a doll, several of them. Um, I need to really prepare myself, regardless of what my point is, about what the other side might say. And sometimes writing about the thing that you don't agree with is a good way to get something really interesting. You tend to do a better job explaining what it is because I guess you're still trying to prove it to yourself. So I would think that one reason for not allowing kids to have or boys to have a doll is that it's a gentle activity and we need our boys to be tough. The second reason that I thought of was society. Man, this society is not going to be kind. They're going to make fun of kids who are boys and play with dolls. And then my final reason is if you take a kid to a toy store, some people would say that boys really aren't interested in girl toys. They're going to want to play with boy toys. So that's how we begin. We explore what could be said on either stance. Now let's look into what the second step would be. Now, it's important for us to look at the next step in figuring out what it is that we're supposed to know and do about organizing our ideas. So, if you're going to prove your position, you can look at the different ways Brufee shares with us how we develop those claims. So, a lot of times we'll introduce the issue and we'll state our position. And a lot of times we're going to really just move in directly of the way we're going to have our working thesis. But if we're not doing enough thinking about the organizational structure, in other words, the way we're going to pave that path for the reader to follow our stance and believe what we believe or be able to make a good decision, we have to specifically choose the best text structure in organizing these reasons and these paragraphs that will do that job. So, one of the very most straightforward and pointed things that we can do is we can begin with our thesis statement that expresses our stance, and then we just give 2 to 3 straightforward reasons in any particular order. It just doesn't really matter. Now, why would you do this? Well, you have reasons that really not any one of them are any more important than another. And so if I'm looking at my pro right here, I'm thinking that my ideas here that playing with a doll, that does not indicate sexual preference, is just as strong as this idea here that learning to play with a doll is just the very important part of a boy's training for accepting what it means to be a good father. So I would have 2 paragraphs here with these reasons that had equal weight. And then my support underneath them would be the text evidence, perhaps, that I've gotten from the book William Stahl. It could be an anecdote about things that I've experienced in my own life, or I can share some perspectives from outside research that really is supportive in proving each one of these reasons. I can do that same work with my other stance and replacing these ideas that have equal weight in my structural paragraph. So that's the first organizational pattern that you can do. Now, what I want you to notice is that I know that this is not an ideal situation. Um, you know, and this is my board right here set up in my little cube. But the important thing, you may not be able to read each one of these, but students can see visually that this is all the same color. This is all the green is go stance. This is the pro stance that I agree that William should have it all. They can also see that these paragraphs stand in equal side by side construction right here. And they also, what we're really saying about this is that the way you decide how you're going to place your ideas really isn't just picking one, it's picking the one that fits what you really intend to say and the way your evidence plays out that you're choosing. Here's another one. I like this one. I'm very comfortable with it because it's something that I was taught to do in creating a speech or working in preparing for a debate. I also have heard countless sermons that have this structure to them. I think a lot of times people don't understand that the order of those was very carefully chosen. And so, what they're trying to do with this organizational structure is they're going to begin with their stance, but then a neat thing is going to happen. They're going to order those ideas and they're going to change the way they present them in order to do something to the reader. So, the second most important idea, the most interesting, most important idea is going to be the one that they lead with. And then they're going to end with, start with a punch and end with a bang. They're going to save their most powerful idea for the end when they're moving toward the conclusion. The weakest idea is going to be the one that's in the middle while everybody's asleep. I'm just kidding. So I'm just going to say this and model this for you right here. So I'm going to say that my most powerful idea, and really what I have most evidence for as I've been preparing these ideas, is that learning to care for a doll is the first step in learning to care for a child. If we really want to raise good fathers and good men, this is going to be a really powerful idea. So I'm going to put that one, that's my most powerful position. Um, Another one that I think is my second most powerful idea, I'm going to begin with that one right here because I want to get everybody's attention with that. And I have a really good anecdote about that that gives some pretty good evidence about what that is. And I think that will give everybody's attention. The weakest idea that I have in terms of reasoning, I really do feel is this one right here. Action figures are just dolls for boys. While that's a compelling reason and it's okay to use, I do think when comparing it with my other two reasons that this one is the least effective idea and will resonate less with my readers. What I'm really hoping to do with this last point here about the great fathers is that I'm really trying to appeal to emotions. I'm trying to tug on that mother or father's heart to get them to really think about who it is that they want to be and who it is that they want to raise or who it is that they would like to see more of in society. And so by leading with this structure, second best, weakest, and best is a delivery system that has been shown effective over the centuries about how to get that work done. Let me show you another one. Here's our next structure. You go ahead and begin with your thesis that William should be able to play with a doll. Now, one of the things that if you really feel like the other side has a good point that you want to discredit or show another way of thinking about, is to use this straw man. And this goes back to the days whenever people used to build a straw man, literally, and burn it in effigy. It was usually some political leader, and they would have a speech about why the ideas of that person were not to be accepted or were not valid or relevant to what was going on. When you're acting like this, like a lawyer, and you want to really begin with tearing down the opposition, then what you want to do is you want to figure out something that they say that you can discredit easily with reasoning, logic, or evidence. So I feel like this one right here is pretty good. And what I can see here is if you were visually, when we mentioned that before, I have my pro, and now I have my red, pink stop, means this is the con side. What I have here is that boys aren't interested in girl toys. And what I found with my evidence is tons of stuff about how even toy stores before Toys R Us um, went out of business, they had stopped having boy and girl aisles. And you started to see Legos that had boy and girl elements in the same aisle. And there were some studies that I found also that talked about presenting toys to young children before they had these preconceived ideas of their gender. They didn't really make those huge decisions about dividing between boy toys and girl toys. So I feel like I can really tear that idea down. And so, what you do then, now that you've torn that idea down, is that you can give a really powerful idea. So, my reason right here is that I could say learning to care for a doll is the best step in learning to care for a child, that really that's not a part of it. But I think another one that really might be powerful with this one right here is to play off of the fears that some people may have that the type of toys and there are some articles and things that have this in there that people fear by giving their students or their children certain activities or toys that it influences their gender. And so that right there might be tied to in a way I can build coherence between these paragraphs. Already what I'm seeing with my students is they begin to see why we are using these organizational structures and how we tie them together to better prove our point. It kind of depends on our purpose for our thesis and how we're going to organize and make that coherence with our evidence throughout the piece. Concession is a technique used in politics. It's really effective whenever you tell someone, it kind of sets them off guard that you agree with something that they're saying. It is a really valid point that they may have. And then you're able to say, all right, I concede. I agree with you that this is true, but I want you to consider this other idea. Now, here's a point on the con side that I really agree with because I've watched it happen. Society isn't going to accept a boy who plays with dolls. I even have evidence in the book that he was called a sissy, and his father didn't even respect him, William, because he had a doll. I agree with that. I can tell stories from my own experience. I can find articles that tell about people that that has happened to. I think there's even a really good commercial about a young boy that gets on a bus with a doll and he's made fun of, and so then you see what his real purpose is for that doll, and it's very heartwarming, but it doesn't um, keep him from being made fun of. So there are tons of ways I can agree and concede to that point. But it gives me a way to lead into what I really think is important. While it may be true that boys are going to be made fun of, there's something more important. And the more important thing is while they're playing with that doll, they're learning important lessons to be able to get that uh, while they're playing with the doll. Again, what we can see is that this is another way that we can structure our arguments so that people can follow our ideas and begin to understand the reasoning behind why we are presenting those perspectives.